Will the resurrected Adventists be a part of the 144,000? Part 1. What does it mean, according to E.G. White, to be translated without seeing death? Some non-trinitarian Seventh-day Adventists believe that those Adventists who died in the face of the third angel's message will be among the 144,000. In this video, I will examine one of their arguments. First of all, I will partly present the position of the one representative of this theological camp. Pastor Vasko Belovski from Canada, the minister of a non-trinitarian Adventist ministry called Seventh-day Press, presented his view on this subject in the video uploaded on their channel on the 28th of March 2026. In the description we read the following: What if the story of the 144,000 is not just about the future, but has already begun? In this study, we go back to the early Advent movement, the writings of Ellen White, and key prophetic passages to uncover a perspective that challenges common assumptions. Could some of the pioneers be part of the 144,000? And what does that mean for us today? This is not just a prophetic topic, it's a personal one. Watch to see what the Bible and the spirit of prophecy actually reveal. In this presentation, Vasko Belovski substantiates his position with the Bible and the writings of Ellen White, but also uses writings of some other pioneers. He argues that the pioneers had the correct view of the subject of the 144,000. Let's watch 3 portions of his presentation. In the first portion, Vasko Belovski tells us what is one of his goals.
So how can we have sealed individuals, or could we have individuals that were already sealed and yet have died in the Lord and be among the 144,000? And how does that happen when one of the prerequisites to be among the 144,000 is to be alive at the second coming of Jesus Christ so you can be redeemed from the earth? This is the question that we ought to answer. Now,
from these words, I conclude that Vasko Belovski, in his presentation, tried to answer the question how the died faithful Adventists can be among the 144,000 at the second coming of Jesus Christ. In my video, I will challenge this particular point. From the 28th minute to the 36th, Vasko Belovski comments on the quote from the Great Controversy, in which Ellen White wrote that all who have died in the face of the third angel's message come forth from the tomb glorified, to hear God's covenant of peace with those who have kept His law. The next two fragments, which we will watch, will be from this part of his presentation. Let's watch the second fragment.
So the individuals spoken of in Daniel chapter 12 are individuals who have died past 1848. Why? Because that's when the third angel's message had begun to be preached. And not only that, but they had died in the faith of the third angel's message. What does that mean? The third angel's message was, what did we learn earlier from James White's writings? It was called, the loud cry of the third angel was called the sealing message. So what happens when you are in the faith of the sealing message? You're sealed. So these individuals, the many spoken of in Daniel 12, that have slept in the dust of the earth, awake to everlasting life, are individuals who have died in the third angel's message, or in other words, in the faith of the third angel's message, or in other words, they have died sealed, which means that they are part of the 144,000.
Here, Vasko Belovski argues that the fact that the dead faithful Adventists are sealed qualifies them to be a part of the 144,000. Let's watch the third fragment.
But praise the Lord, His Word has been with us. We all have an opportunity to understand it. Not only that, but aside from the Bible, we have what? The writings of Ellen White. Not only that, but on top of it, we have what? What did Revelation 14:13 tell us to do? To reprint, to bring back that which those who formed the movement believed and taught unitedly. You can go back and you can get Loughborough's book, Questions on the Sealing Message, and read it. And then you can go and get Uriah Smith's book and read it. You can go and get Stephen Haskell's book and read it. You can go and get James White's book and read it. Do you know what you're going to find with respect to this one subject? You can go ahead and get The Great Controversy and read it, and you will see no deviation in the understanding when it comes to this subject. Presented over and over and over again.
Here, Vasko Belovski virtually argues that the pioneers were unanimous on this point, that the died, sealed Adventists will be among 144,000. I have summarized Vasko Belovski's position. One of the prerequisites to be among the 144,000 is to be alive at the second coming of Jesus Christ. Individuals who have died past 1848 in the face of the third angel's message are sealed. They fulfill the prerequisite by being resurrected. So, they are a part of the 144,000. Loughborough, Uriah Smith, Stephen Haskell, James White, and Ellen White are in unity on this subject. In my video, I will concentrate on the point whether the resurrection of the faithful Adventists qualifies them to be considered as the living saints. Vasko Belovski virtually promotes John Lovber's position, which agrees with the Uriah Smith's view on the subject. I did not investigate the writings of other pioneers, so I can't say whether they agree with them. Let's read Lovber's arguments, which are presented in his pamphlet Questions on the Sealing Message, printed in 1916. The third part of his pamphlet, called Third Question: Will any who have died in the faith since 1848, when that message was received, be reckoned with the 144,000? In this section, he gives his counter-arguments to the argument that only those who have never died will constitute the 144,000. He wrote, "Notwithstanding these facts, in the testimonies presented, it is still urged by some that what is said in the Great Controversy, page 649, shows that the 144,000 will be composed wholly of those who have never died." So, in his pamphlet, Lovber obviously tries to prove that his opponents misunderstood and misinterpreted some statements of Ellen White concerning the 144,000. Let's see how he disproves what was perceived by him as a wrong understanding. He wrote, "We read in Spiritual Gifts, page 143, I saw writing, copies of which were scattered in different parts of the land, giving orders that unless the saints should yield their peculiar faith, give up the Sabbath, and observe the first day of the week, the people were at liberty, after a certain time, to put them to death. Satan wished to have the privilege of destroying the saints of the Most High, but Jesus bade his angels watch over them. God would be honored by making a covenant with those who had kept his law in the sight of the heathen round about them, and Jesus would be honored by translating without their seeing death the faithful waiting ones who had so long expected him. Keeping the law in the sight of the heathen was in the sight of these inquisitors who had the decree to put them to death, and not to death in an ordinary sense, under calm conditions. It is from this testimony, translating without seeing death, that the claim has been made that none will be among the sealed 144,000, but those who live until Christ's actual second coming. We see that the death they are saved from is the death permitted by the papers circulated. Bear in mind that the resurrected Sabbath keepers are included among the covenantees, so they are to be translated at Christ's coming, without suffering the threatened death. There is another testimony from the Great Controversy, page 649, used by those who claim that none who have died in the message will be among the 144,000. This is what is said of the whole of 144,000, and in part will be true of the resurrected Sabbath keepers, for they endure the time of Jacob's trouble. They are raised under the sixth plague and see the final outpouring of God's judgments under the seventh plague, and are among those delivered from this decree of death. In essence, Lovber's argument is this: the phrase "without seeing death" means without suffering the threatened death in the death decree concerning the Sabbath keepers. In other words, this death is a particular death, not death in a general sense. So Lovber thought that his opponents misunderstood the words of Ellen White without seeing death. They interpreted it as meaning that all the 144,000 will never die before the second coming of Christ. But Lovber argues that the words of Ellen White mean that the 144,000 will not die the threatened death. Here on this slide, I present his view graphically. So, according to him, the phrase "without seeing death" simply means that the 144,000 will not be killed by the wicked in the time of Jacob's trouble. That allows the 144,000 to be composed both of the resurrected ones and those who never died. That's why my aim in this video is to answer two questions. In other words, what is the meaning of the phrase "without seeing death"? Does E.G. White mean death in a particular or in a general sense? In other words, I will examine whether Lovber correctly interpreted the words of Ellen White. The best way to do it is analyze the usage of the phrase "without seeing death" in her writings. The first quote is from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, page 59, paragraph 1. It is the first vision of Ellen White given her in December 1844. While this quote does not contain the phrase "without seeing death," It gives us the term by which she denotes the 144,000. It is the phrase, the living saints. Let's read the quote. Soon we heard the voice of God like many waters, which gave us the day and the hour of Jesus' coming. The living saints, 144,000 in number, knew and understood the voice, while the wicked thought it was thunder and an earthquake. Now let's read the second quote. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 476, paragraph 2. He, Moses, saw the second coming of Christ in glory, the righteous dead raised to immortal life, and living saints translated without seeing death, and together ascending with songs of gladness to the city of God. Here Ellen White again used the term the living saints. Obviously, she refers to the 144,000. She explains that the living saints translated without seeing death. She explains that the living saints are translated without seeing death, while the righteous dead are raised. We see two groups, the resurrected ones and those who translated without seeing death. In connection with this, we should ask three following questions. What does it mean, according to Ellen White, to be translated without seeing death? Does it mean to be delivered from the death decree? Or does it mean to be never died? Additional quotes will answer these questions. Now let's read the third quote. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 478, paragraph 2. Had not the life of Moses been marred with that one sin, in failing to give God the glory of bringing water from the rock at Kadesh, he would have entered the promised land, and would have been translated to heaven without seeing death. But he was not long to remain in the tomb. Christ himself, with the angels who had buried Moses, came down from heaven to call forth the sleeping saints. What does the phrase would have been translated to heaven without seeing death mean? From the context, it is obvious that Moses would be translated without dying. Like Enoch, Moses would never die before his translation. Now let's read the fourth quote. Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 2, page 336, paragraph 2. Moses was present, represented those who will be raised from the dead at the second coming of Christ. And Elijah, who was translated to heaven without seeing death, represented those who will be living on earth at the time of Christ's second appearing, and who will be changed from mortal to immortal, and be translated to heaven without seeing death. This quote gives us the clue to the meaning of the phrase without seeing death. Because Elijah never died before his translation, the living saints also will never die before their translation. Elijah cannot represent those who will be resurrected in special resurrection. They can be represented only by Moses. So the phrase without seeing death simply means without dying death, which is common for all men. Now let's read the fifth quote, Christ and the Law. The article in Arabian Herald, 29th of April 1875, page 138. Enoch was borne by angels to heaven without seeing death. Enoch's translation to heaven represents the commandment-keeping people of God who will be alive upon the earth when Christ shall come the second time, and who will be glorified in the sight of those who hated them because they would keep the commandments of God. These also will be translated to heaven without seeing death, as Enoch and Elijah were. Here Ellen White clearly states that the living saints are represented by Enoch and Elijah, who are never died before their own translation. Now let's read the sixth quote. Desire of Ages, page 530, paragraph 3. He that believeth in me, said Jesus, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? Christ here looks forward to the time of his second coming. Then the righteous dead shall be raised incorruptible, and the living righteous shall be translated to heaven without seeing death. This is very interesting and remarkable quote. Here Ellen White quotes the words of Jesus from John chapter 11, 25-26, and explains them as referring to the second coming of Christ. The living righteous are those who will live and will never die. It is, they will be translated without seeing death. The same thought is presented in the seventh quote. The resurrection of Lazarus. The Youth Instructor, the 13th of April, 1899, page 286. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. His death will not be eternal. And whosoever liveth and believeth on me shall never die. The saints who are living when Christ comes will be translated to heaven without seeing death. From these 7 quotes, I conclude that at the second coming of Christ, there will be 2 groups of saints. The resurrected saints are the first group. They once died and then resurrected before their translation. They are represented by Moses. The living saints are the second group. They have never died before their translation. They are represented by Elijah and Enoch. Moses and other saints died death which is common for all men. They tasted death, but Enoch, Elijah, and the 144,000, the living saints, didn't taste death. The obvious conclusion from this is that the phrase without seeing death means without dying death, which is common for all men. Now we can answer the question: what is the meaning of the phrase without seeing death? E.G. White means death common for all men. It has death in a general sense, in ordinary sense. So the phrase means without dying at all, never dying. It is interesting that James White, the husband of Ellen White, understood the phrase without seeing death in the same way as his wife did. In his preface to E.G. White's book Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3, page 18, paragraph 1, he wrote, "The Apostle says, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16-17, For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds, to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore, comfort one another with these words." Here he again uses the word we, but the events mentioned did not occur in Paul's day. He and his brethren at Thessalonica were not translated to heaven without seeing death. It is obvious from the context that the phrase without seeing death here means without ever dying before translation. Here is also the quote from an obituary published in Review and Herald, the 7th of October 1862, page 151. Died in Grantham, New Hampshire, August 23rd, 1862. Of consumption. Sister Vashti Palfrey, age about 72 years. Sister P was a professor of religion for over 50 years. She ever expressed a strong desire to live that she might be translated to heaven without seeing death. But God saw fit to order it otherwise. She died with a bright hope of immortality and a firm faith that she should sleep but a little while ere she would come forth glorified. It seems that it was common understanding among Adventists that the phrase "without seeing death" meant without ever dying before translation. Another quote, L.A. Hoops, "Take heed lest ye fall." Reading for Thursday, December 28, General Conference Bulletin, October the 1st, 1899, page 91, paragraph 8. In a certain sense, the history of the children of Israel will be repeated. They were going to the promised Canaan, we to a heavenly Canaan. They expected to pass over to that good land without seeing death. So likewise the children of God in this generation are looking forward to the appearing of Christ in the clouds of heaven, when the living righteous will be translated to heaven without seeing death. Obviously, Hoops means that the living saints will never die before their translation. Now, let's compare the meaning of the phrase "without seeing death" drawn out from its usage in E.G. White's writings with its interpretation given by Lovber. In her writings, the phrase "without seeing death" means that the person have never died before his translation. Lovber interprets this phrase as meaning that the 144,000 will not die the threatened death in the time of Jacob's trouble. Virtually, he distorted the meaning of the words of E.G. White concerning the living saints. He made her contradicting herself. His interpretation destroys the type-anti-type connection between Enoch, Elijah, and the living saints. It makes Ellen White inconsistent. Writing in his pamphlet Questions on the Sealing Message that the words of Ellen White, which he quoted, support the idea that the resurrected faithful Sabbath keepers will be among the 144,000, he misinterprets the statements of Ellen White. It's my opinion. The subject is complex. That's why it is impossible in one video to present all discrepancies which the Lover's position generates. So, I hope to make other videos if God will permit. I'm planning to answer in the next video the following question. Will the resurrected Sabbath keepers participate in the Jacob's trouble? Thank you for watching.